One. Welcome back, Beans Army, to another episode of the Less is More Sports Podcast, the college offseason podcast, where you could say we're less of the regular season, but more of the offseason. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, you might have noticed the names that Matt and I have decided to go with for this episode. I'm just going to go out and say it that we made a prediction at the beginning of the college football season. I thought that Colorado had a good chance to make a bowl game with all the new transfers that came in, Coach Prime coming in, all the buzz around there. But Matt wasn't so sold just yet. And as of right now, Matt was right. So as you saw on Twitter, common Matt dub. But for some reason, Matt doesn't think he's got a dub. He's on top of the dub right now, and his name is Common Matt L. So Matt, why are you giving yourself an L here, bud?
Oh, I don't know. You just gotta staying humble and whatnot. I've been wrong a lot more than I've been right. What do we determine once we talk pre-show? We usually get about 3 good predictions a year that end up like making us look really good, and then there are a bunch that we just don't talk about anymore.
So what are you trying to say, that nobody should just watch the show because we're always wrong?
What I'm saying is sports is complicated and nobody can really fathom it.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. The first half of the college football season, I thought I was looking like a genius outside of Boise State. And then the second half of the season has come and I'm like, wow, I look like a total idiot right now.
Well, that was the other. I guess that was the other place where, on the cap or no cap, I kind of was right too. Was like, I refuse to bury Alabama until I know they're dead, and
Right.
that turned out to be a good move. Even though it was funny those couple of weeks I almost lost to South Florida.
I still don't think they're gonna win a title for the rest of Nick Saban's tenure there, but that's just me.
But they're still in the picture, which is just scary because it's just like New England. Oh, they're not going to win the title in 2017. Jacksonville's got a good defense. They're back in the Super Bowl. Or the year before that, or the year before that. Any year in the Tom Brady era was just like, oh, the Patriots aren't that good. Oh, shit, they're in the Super Bowl. Never mind.
The only thing I gotta say is that if Texas wins out and Alabama wins out, if the committee picks Alabama over Texas in that scenario, they're just absolutely rigged at this point, because obviously they at the same time will have the same amount of ranked wins, for one. Not to mention Texas beat Alabama at Bryant Denny Stadium. So it's like you got to give it to Texas at that point. I'm sorry. If it's between those two at least. But I ultimately think it's going to be one of those Pac-12 teams that gets in over both of them, whether it's Washington or Oregon, whatever.
Oh, you forget, Bless. You forget.
About what?
There's another team that's sneaking up on you and Alabama. You know who they are. Their best shot at taking L number 2, unfortunately, now has a catastrophic injury at the most important position.
No, don't even do that. No, don't even do that, because
ACC champion Cardinals, Les.
No, don't even do that. No, not even.
12-1. Conference
But they have a loss.
champion.
But they have the worst loss of the one-loss teams that are in the college football playoff picture. So no, don't even do that. No.
You misunderstand, I think, how many people hate Texas.
No, I don't, trust me. No, I understand that. Hell, Texas fans hate Texas half the time. I mean, just read the comments after every win. They're never satisfied. Dude, I ran the Twitter poll, bro, and was like, what's easier to please, an angry wife or Texas fans? An angry wife won.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
That is accurate.
But you know what I'm thinking, Les? Jeff Brom, he's looking over the shoulder. You don't see it right now.
Jeff Brom is forever cursing me for hopping on this show and saying that he's not going to Louisville.
And now look at it. But for every Jeff Brom that gets hired in the coaching cycle, we have a few guys who seem like they're going to actually do something and then never do. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's talk about some coaches, Les.
Let's talk about some crazy coaching fires. And of course, I expect this number to go up as the season, but we already have a couple big names that have entered the crazy coaching fired list. And we got to, of course, talk about the biggest one, the big elephant in the room here. Dino Barber's getting fired from Syracuse. No, obviously I'm kidding. But Jimbo Fisher officially out at Texas A&M. And what's crazy is that Texas A&M is paying him $75 million to not coach at Texas A&M. and he leaves his tenure with obviously no national championships, no conference or division titles, no 10-win seasons, no ranked wins on the road, plus a worse record. This is the big one. A worse record than the previous coach, Kevin Sumlin, who was also fired by the university. So, Matt, I guess my number one question for you is, where did it all go wrong for Jimbo?
Well, here's the thing that comes to mind when we talk about this Texas Tech team, these Texas Tech, the Texas A&M teams. There's going to be the one thing that always comes to mind, which is this is the downside, I guess, or downside for lack of a better term, of the new era of college football. Every year they brought in the best recruiting classes. They had one of the biggest NIL bases in the country. And at the end of the day, like what, top three recruiting classes just couldn't get anything done. They lost to Appalachian State, for Christ's sake, at home. I know Michigan knows a thing or two about that, but we'll get to them later. But it's just amazing to think about how a team that accumulated this much talent, and then in addition to having that talent, the coach ran his mouth for the first time in the SEC, which is always loaded, and just couldn't get it done. And I mean, like I said, they lose to Appalachian State. They were never a threat in the SEC West because they competed with dynasty after dynasty. It's one of the more astounding, like, oh, well, that was weird. Because when Jimbo Fisher first got hired for that long period of time, I mean, they gave him a plaque that said 20 blank blank national champion that hung in his office. And, people thought, oh, it's going to be like Florida State. He's going to come and he's going to do the exact same thing he did there. And he never had a quarterback, I think, as good as Jameis Winston, ever.
No.
He never had a corner as good as Jalen Ramsey with all the talent in the world. And it's just amazing to think about how in, 4 short years it went from looking like a home run hire that was going to make a competitive program in the SEC that was taking a step up to join the conference. And now it's like, and we'll get to this later, I'm sure, but I don't know where they go from here. I mean, this is almost like a death knell in a lot of ways. I know you've got all the money in the world, but you've shown that with all the money and with all the recruits that you can't really get these guys to play as a unit and to play at the high enough level where they can actually, compete in games. And I mean, how many guys left are leaving in the transfer portal have left in the transfer portal already? And it's just incredible to think, like, in this modern era, this falls squarely on the shoulders of a coaching staff who tried everything, who brought in Bobby Petrino, for God's sake, who, even with his baggage, is an offensive mastermind, and they still just couldn't pull anything off, anything impressive off. And that's, I think, the most shocking thing about this. I'm thinking really hard right now, and I can't think of a signature win at all for Jimbo Fisher in his time
Like I
there.
said, they had no ranked wins on the road.
Exactly, and that falls
that's
squarely on the
unacceptable.
coaching staff to have that much talent, to have that many guys,
That many resources, yeah.
and just not do anything with it. That makes it an extremely hard corner to fight out of because you're in the SEC already, and it's only going to get tougher. And I mean, you have all the money in the world. You're going to be able to get some guys to come and play, but still, if they're not going to get coached up and you aren't producing the draft picks and they leave anyway, what's the point? What do you do? And I think that's the most astounding thing is that, like, a Jimbo Fisher hire with seemingly like in no time at all has left Texas A&M, and then almost untenable position.
You know what's crazy is, like, I wanted to give Jimbo a pass after last year because I felt like there was just way too much hype coming in with the greatest football recruiting class of all time. Because I mean, yes, we see it in college basketball all the time. You have a great recruiting class coming in, you have these great one and done prospects, but college football is obviously not like college basketball. I don't think I'm telling anything there, but I felt like there was just way too much hype surrounding a group of freshmen that it's like, okay, I just felt like they came in with too much expectation. But this year, it's like this is supposed to be the year that he's supposed to silence all that noise, and they didn't do anything. Like you said, they brought in Bobby Petrino. They made other moves on the coaching staff, and they just couldn't get it done. Like, if you look at everything they do on the offseason, and then you look at their success on the field, none of it makes sense, like, at all. And of course, we all know what my first two thoughts were, because anytime something happens, my first thoughts are, Well, how does it affect my teams, right? Like any sports fan. Because remember, we're not journalists right now. We're podcast hosts that are fans first. Let's be honest about it. But
Yes.
the two things that I thought about, obviously, number one, I'm hoping to God they stay away from Mike Elko. And number two, does this mean that Evan Stewart transfers to Texas? I mean, because if people remember, like when he was getting recruited, I'm talking about Evan Stewart, the star receiver at A&M, one of the few bright spots that they have. It came down to A&M and Texas. And with Jimbo getting fired, does this make him want to enter the portal and potentially go to Texas? Because Texas next year, I mean, you're looking at someone like Xavier Worthy or A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington are all going to be gone. And they got young guys like Jonte Cook, Casey Kane that could they could fill the next roles up. But I mean, I think Evan Stewart could get significant minutes over them. I mean, honestly, no disrespect to those guys, but Evan Stewart's an absolute stud. And then not to mention there's 3 current A&M commits that are very likely to flip to Texas because of this move. You got defensive lineman Dominic McKinley, you got safety Miles Davis, and linebacker T. Anthony Smith. We could put Texas already has the number 4 recruiting class in this year's in the class of 2024. And with the firing of Jimbo Fisher, if they get those guys to flip, that could only make it stronger, and that could only put Texas in an even better position heading into the SEC. But of course, the Elko one, and I'm going to be completely honest, because when we're going to get into who are the most likely guys to replace Jimbo Fisher, I'm just going to go ahead and get it off the books now. Mike Elko makes the most sense. His previous job was the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. Of course, he's come around and turned Duke around within 1 season and now 2 full seasons there. And I mean, they were talking about a guy that knows the culture, knows the boosters, and he's able to get the most out of talent, which is a big thing given what we just witnessed in the Jimbo Fisher era. So Elko makes the most sense, but obviously the Duke fan of me is like praying, football gods, do not let this happen. We want him in Durham. And of course, I'm hearing all the Duke beat writers say that Mike Elko is happy in Durham, but we all know how far happiness goes. I mean, the Texas A&M's football program can throw a lot more money at Elko than Duke's can. Let's just be completely honest here.
Yep.
So I mean, they can flat out, if they're willing to pay Jimbo $75 million to not coach there, I mean, they can absolutely give Mike Elko an offer that he absolutely can't refuse. But Matt, before I asked you, who you think should take over as the next Texas A&M coach, I do want to say that the 4 biggest names that were floating around the possible replacement of Jimbo Fisher, Mike Norvell at Florida State, Dan Lanning, coach at Oregon, Mike Elko, obviously, and Kalen DeBoer. And given those 4 names, I ran a Twitter poll before we got on the show. And ironically enough, the one who won, Dan Lanning, has already come out and said, I'm not going to A&M. I'm staying in Oregon. So, Matt, given that, in your just honest fanhood opinion, who do you think should take over as the next head coach at Texas A&M?
You see, this is where it sucks because I was hoping I was going to get to piss you off by doing this because
you were going to say Elko, weren't you?
It is Elko. I mean,
yeah,
I think that Texas A&M fans are kind of deluding themselves when they think about Dan Lanning or Kellen DeBoer or Lane Kiffin or even Eli Drinkwitz from Missouri. Mm-hmm. Because what's the incentive to move to Texas A&M other than money? If you're Lane Kiffin and Eli Drinkwitz, you're already in the SEC at programs that are slightly less pressure. The only thing they can offer you is money. If you're Dan Lanning, you're going into the Big Ten. They're going to give you all the money in the world to stay in Oregon. And you're going to get even more of a boost when you join the Big Ten for football. Mike Norvell is the other kind of interesting one because when I get to Elko, I'll say this too, is that the ACC, I think, would be the most likely place if you're going to get a coach to come from because that conference is constantly teetering on the verge of infinity.
Right.
And, Mike Norvell may see that and want to jump ship, but Florida State is going to get a live draft from either the Big Ten.
Before you continue, I do want to bring this point up. Given what just happened with Jimbo Fisher, do we really even think A&M wants to go after another Florida State coach?
Why would you want to? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result.
Right.
I mean, and Florida State's going to get a live draft from either the Big Ten or the SEC if the ACC falls apart. And just to be frank, Les, I'm not saying this to insult your team, but Duke will not.
Mhm.
They don't make.
No,
There's a
none
reason
taken.
why basketball is one of the non-revenue sports. And like you said, he's the former defensive coordinator. He knows the culture. He knows what it takes to win in. Oh crap! I almost said. I'm thinking of Texas Tech. I almost said Lubbock, and I'm like, no, that's Texas Tech again. But he knows what it takes to
College
win
Station.
down College
College
Station.
Station.
He knows what it takes to win down there. So I mean, it just makes perfect sense. And if they can't get him, I don't think they're going to get a Dan Lanning or a Lane Kiffin. I think you're talking about you're, a name that I think would be really interesting to see involved in this is Cliff Kingsbury.
Mhm.
We all know how badly it went in Arizona, but we forget that the guy does have a tendency to have at least explosive seasons from quarterbacks at least once. I think at this point, if you're Texas A&M, you're just hoping to get like an explosive season from a quarterback. So I think like a Cliff Kingsbury, a Mike Elko would be my number one candidate. Then like Cliff Kingsbury, and then you get like Jeff Traylor at UTSA. I love the Roadrunners, but that's the kind of move that doesn't move the needle for that fan base. I don't think
Mhm.
it does, or the SEC. I love the
No.
guy. I love what he's done at Tech at UTSA. I love Frank Harris. Like I said, I love the Roadrunners. Meet meet. But that's just the kind of move that doesn't move the needle at all to get the fans back, to get the players back, or anything like that. So that's like the third candidate. And I mean, there are a couple other guys too, like Willie Fritz at Tulane. But once again, that's more of a safe bet, kind of like prove it move. And I don't think that Texas A&M will want to do that. I think they'll want to make a huge splash. But I also, excuse me, I think the problem is they're splash candidates unless you're willing just to offer them like basically control of half the state of Texas. Probably won't want to leave their nice, comfortable positions in major conferences to come and try to revitalize that. That's what I'm thinking. So for me, you got Mike Elko, you got Clint Kingsbury type,
Cliff.
Cliff Kingsbury
Cliff.
type,
Yeah, Cliff.
and then you've got like the Willie Fritzes and Jeff Trailers who are good coaches and great guys, but don't get that needle moving in the way that you want Texas A&M's needle to move.
See, Matt thought I was going to be offended when he said Mike Elko, but we're obviously on the same
Yes,
wavelength for
we
that
are.
because yeah, it was Elko makes like too much sense. It makes an insanely amount of sense, and I hate it. As a Duke fan of me is like I hate it because this is the reality that we live in. But this is the move. If there was ever a time that Elko is going to leave Duke, this is probably the time. I mean, so
Yeah.
did we wrap up everything we have to say about Jimbo, or is there anything else you want to add?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. I mean, the Elko thing just makes too much sense, and it's just astounding that we're in this position so quickly.
All right, we're going to move on to the next coaching fire, and I think it goes without saying that we absolutely saw this coming a mile away. I mean, during one of our our hiatuses, I even made a snippet on Spotify that called "Andy Avalos is done in Boise," and we saw Andy Avalos getting fired from the Broncos about a mile away. He was 22-14 in 3 seasons in Boise, 5-5 this season before he was fired. Two blown 17-point leads to Memphis and Colorado State.
Yeah, that's
Um,
incredible.
and of course, much similar to the Jimbo Fisher situation, he had a worse record than the previous coach who was also fired. So, I mean, I see a continuous trend going on here with these coaching fires. But my number one question I have with this one for you, do you think this causes someone like Ashton Jeanty to transfer?
That's always a good question to ask, but I mean, I think it just depends on who you get to replace them. I mean, it's all about connecting with your guys and proving to them that you are the dude who's going to lead them to even better success. Because we're talking about Boise State too, like they're 4-8 right now, but they're still going to a bowl game. It's not the
Yeah,
kind
they
of bowl game they're used to going to, but they're going to a bowl game. They're 6-5 right now. They just beat Utah State yesterday. They have a chance to finish 7-5, being a better bowl too. So, well, when it comes to guys like Ashton Jeanty and stuff like that, that's one of the weird like cases of like the transfer portal being weird still because it's like
yeah,
let's say they get a dude who instantly connects with them and he decides to stay. That's great. Maybe it was in his cards to have a breakout season this year and then transfer to like a Oregon or a Washington or a USC or something like that. Maybe it's in the cards. You don't know what's going through the player's head when like they get this news. It's like, well, I was just going to transfer out anyway. I like Boise, but I want to increase my draft stock.
right.
Or in Or is it like, I'm going to give the new guy a chance and just see how it plays out? I love it here. And if he doesn't work out, that's when I'll leave. So it's just weird to think about because you don't know what's going through the guy's head now you have that transfer. If you want to head out now, if it was always in the cards to spend a few years building a star in Boise State and then move on to a bigger fish in a bigger pond, or if you're going to give this guy a chance and just try to be a small fish in a big fish in a small pond.
Right. If you had to pick one school, say Ashton Jeanty does transfer, if you had to pick one school that you would just like to see him go to, doesn't even have to make sense, you would just like to see it happen, who would you pick?
Naturally, I want all transfers to come to Indiana to see if they can actually
Well,
win 6
okay,
games.
yeah. I mean, without stating the obvious, we can't pick our favorite teams because that's the most obvious answer we can think of.
You're going
Yes,
to pick Texas, and you know it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, especially with the Jonathan Brooks torn ACL, we don't know what he's coming back. Like, I mean, CJ Baxter is good, but let's just load that running back room up, man. I mean,
Okay,
we're heading to the
thee and not
SEC
for
next
me,
year.
I
We got to
see.
ground and pound this shit.
Okay. Rules for thee and not for me. Okay, I get it. No, I guess if I had to pick like a real team that would be kind of fun, I guess, I just had a thought. Imagine Ashton Jeanty on Iowa. They'd never ever pass. It would be the funniest thing ever. And they're handing the ball off.
They would just run 50 times a game.
They're handing the ball off again.
I wonder what play they're going to run next.
They're running to the left this time. My God, that's an innovative offense.
I just want to point out, though, that Bean is a fan of teams running the ball.
I know. Bean's a pound the rock guy. We've established.
Yeah, because he's all about speed. He's a total speed guy.
He is. I guess, for a guy like him, too, I mean, the suitors would be some of the bigger names you'd have to assume. I mean, I could honestly see Michigan and Ohio State being like, yo, come down here. We got Blake Corum. You can come here, too, be the next Blake Corum, something fun like that. So
see, that's what I was thinking, but I was kind of shaky to say that because of the whole Harbaugh situation. We still don't know what's coming out of that. Plus, they just fired another linebacker coach. So they're looking to kind of weed out the coaching staff right now. So I mean, there's a little uncertainty there. But
I think it's gonna.
we can look at. I mean, but like you said, look at it like someone like Ohio State too. I mean, that would be fun because I don't think I think Travion Henderson either goes pro or is out of eligibility. But somebody please quote me on that. Mayan Williams has not looked the same since the start of this season. I mean, they bring in somebody like Jeanty, they can totally pound the rock with him. And of course, whether it's McCord or whether it's Devin Brown or Legan Kleinholtz or Air Nolan, who's going to start a quarterback next year, just all depending on how spring training goes. I mean, I would assume it's going to be McCord because I don't think McCord is done enough to go pro yet. Obviously, no, but I'm pretty sure he has eligibility left. But yeah, you never know because I mean, it's times with some of the performances he's had early in the season. Ryan Day might think hey, it's an open quarterback battle in spring training. I mean, the spring game or whatever. But so yeah, Ohio State would be a realistic. I think could be a realistic opportunity for him. Of course, I feel like it's so cliche just given what we dealt with this past offseason, but Colorado clearly.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
Colorado.
Colorado's always an obvious answer for any time we bring up the transfer portal.
They are the Arkansas of the college football transfer portal.
That is a great analogy. That is actually a phenomenal analogy.
They are on every guy, whether you know it or not.
Absolutely. They've offered a scholarship to everybody. But so if you remember listening to the Spotify snippet that I had, Andy Avalos has done in Boise, I picked 3 potential guys to replace him as the head coach. I suggested someone like the defensive coordinator from Michigan, Jesse Minter, which if they're cleaning house, I mean, that could be a prime opportunity. Boise State did not have a good defense this year, and he could come in and establish a new culture there. You have Florida State offensive coordinator Alex Atkins, who is a very run-heavy offense, which would favor someone like a Jeanty. But I'm going to tell you, this is the guy, Matt, and I want to run this by you. This is the guy that I absolutely think needs to be the next head coach in Boise State. And that is none other than Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. And the reason I say this is because if you look historically, there's a weird pipeline between Washington and Boise State coaches. And, want to talk about something that hits home? Look at our defensive coordinator, Pete Kwiatkowski. He was the defensive coordinator at both Boise and Washington. I mean, and plus, not to mention Chris Peterson and among all others. But given that weird pipeline between Boise State and Washington, this already makes sense. Not to mention offensively, we know Ryan Grubb can coach. He's a protege of Kalen DeBoer. His first season as the offensive coordinator, he helped Washington improve from the 114th ranked offense to second in his first season, not to mention first in passing. And in his second year, the Huskies, at the time of this recording, are sixth in total offense, and Michael Penix is a Heisman candidate. So, I mean, me personally, I would love to see Ryan Grubb as the next head coach in Boise. And I think he would do a phenomenal job.
I think you're right. And the other reason that I would support that is because I promise this will come around full circle in a minute. Is I don't know if you saw this week, Les. It was a big news week for a lot of reasons. But Washington State and Oregon State have entered into a 2-year like trial period with with the rest of the Mountain West teams.
Yeah.
And if they merge and add a couple teams, like Memphis, Tulane, Tulsa, then because of the right a court ruling happened, they would be that conference, the new Pac-12 or the Mountain 12 or whatever the hell they would be called, would be in line for a berth in a college football playoff. And if you're going to be in line for a berth for something that important, even though we're expanding it to 12 teams, you've got to get a guy who knows how to play pro style, who knows how to play an explosive, pro-producing offense. And I think you get that with Grubb. And you're going to need that if you're going to be competing against some of the teams in the new Mountain Pack American, whatever it's going to be called.
The Mountain Pack. Call it the Mountain Pack.
The PCA, whatever you're going to call it. And I think I think Grubb is a good guy to get in there because he's proven, especially this year, that he deserves the keys to a major offense because he's handled Michael Penix, he's handled Odunze, he's handled McMillan incredibly well. And I think that will translate well to a Boise State type environment where, your Boise State now, of all like the mid majors in college football, you're right up there with Appalachian State and stuff as the most known. And that's going to help you a lot on the West Coast. And like I said, if you're competing possibly to be in a conference that has a chance at a spot in the college football playoff with 12 teams, then you've got to have like an offense that can go out there and compete with anybody and try to outscore them. And that's a guy who can do that. And I mean, Minter, I think, would be a bigger, like, whoa, higher, but the whoa would be a negative whoa because we'd be wondering how much was that actually coaching and how much of that was Uncle T and his booster friends and their cameras. So I would go with Grubb right now, too. I think you're on the money there.
I'll say Minter also, it's like how much of the baggage that comes from Michigan is going to carry over if he were to get the head coaching job at Boise State.
Exactly.
So are we on the same wavelength again, going with Grubb as the lead candidate as our top candidate? Okay.
I would go with him, too.
Keeping this theme of offense going, we're going to go to the next coaching fire. And the first thing that comes to mind with this one is that I've said this once, I've said this 100 times, but this is a prime example of why, as we approach 10 minutes left to go, wow, this is a quick episode. I'll make this as quick as possible. But this is a prime example of why numbers do not tell the whole story. Matt, what if I told you that Penn State is 15th in scoring offense?
I would believe that.
See, watching them play, like, I would not believe that at all. And of course, you look at their schedule, and they've run the score up against inferior opponents, but against teams that could actually match their talent, their offenses
are not good.
They are awful, and that's why Penn State fired their offense coordinator Mike Yurcich. So, as much as we've made the joke about Iowa, when Penn State plays a team that can match their talent, Penn State matches the whole Iowa.
Yes, they do. And it's that's really been a shock to me because I remember how intrigued I was by the prospect of them actually having a good running back, a good quarterback in Drew Aller, and just watching him like break down after like every game they play against, like you said, a good opponent, and just being like, "I suck." I'm like, I don't know how much of that is you, Drew. I don't know how much of that is you sucking because like that game plan against Michigan was just abysmal.
and Ohio State. It was just awful. Of course,
I think
Ohio
it's
State, he missed a lot. He missed a lot of gimme throws, but it's
but
still
that
like
Michigan
the play
State,
calling was awful.
that Michigan game plan was just oof.
Yeah,
The
oof.
weird
I think you
fourth
and me
down
could have done a better
choices.
job. I think
I think
Bean could have called a better game.
Bean would just be like, "I like football rough."
Bean would be like, put me out there at wide receiver. Just let me go deep.
It would be like Air Bean.
Air Bean.
Air
Bean would be
Bean.
like the second coming of Deshaun Jackson. Just run like bubble screens and go routes the entire time.
And
Or
then he
like
throws
to keep the theme of like dogs that I have. You know, I had a dog growing up named Hyatt, and Bean could be the next coming of Jalen Hyatt.
he could. He could.
I mean,
Or he
because
would be
Jalen
like,
Hyatt was the same way at Tennessee. I mean, he pretty much ran bubble screens and go routes.
or he'd fumble the ball before, or he'd throw the ball out celebratorily before he crossed the goal line and they recovered the one, just like
Yep.
Deshaun Jackson. But yeah, I mean, it was just an abysmal game plan. So I'm like, somebody's got to get scapegoated there. But I mean, at what point, if you're Penn State and the fan base, I mean, they're already booing him. There was nobody yesterday at their win against Rutgers. At what point do you just say enough? Do you give James Franklin one more year and be like, look, dude, you either beat one of the two of these guys or you're out?
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's not going to get any easier if you're Penn State.
No.
You're used to being what, the third best team usually in the Big Ten, and now you're adding in USC, who look USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, who are explosive offenses and pretty decent defenses. Well, not USC,
Except USC,
not USC, but
which we're going to get to here in a second.
you're throwing in a lot of these guys. At what point do you look at James Franklin and be like, all right, that's it. You're a good coach. You're a good guy. You came to us at a time where we needed you, but you just you can't get over the hump. This isn't
Agreed.
Vanderbilt.
Agreed. And just for time constraints, I think we got to move on to another coaching fire. And speaking of that awful USC defense, USC finally fires Alex Grinch. And I'm going to be completely honest, Matt. You know, remember Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch both used to coach at Oklahoma, and you know my Horns have played them, you know, a time or two. Gonna say it like that.
Yeah, there's some
just a
games
couple. And I'm gonna be honest, I always felt like Grinch like showed potential of being a good defensive coordinator because he would have certain games where that defense would look really good, but then they would have these other lapses where they would just look awful. And then given how his stint at USC has gone, I obviously gave them a pass year one. It's first year with the team. I get it. Some stuff goes right, some stuff goes wrong. That's the nature of the business. But this year, when they had 8 key transfers come in on the defensive side of the ball and they really addressed a big need, I feel like from a player perspective, this was the year to really make a big improvement, and he absolutely did not. Of course, USC was my preseason title pick, and I look like a complete idiot for that. It's a common less L with that regard, but it's not really all on Lincoln Riley. I mean, they just haven't had a good defensive coordinator. They haven't had a good defense, and that's the one thing that's really stopping them from being an elite team in college football. So I think I think it just goes without saying, USC just needs to go out and get a good defensive coordinator. And once they finally do, and they actually have a defense that could compete with that offense, watch out.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too. Like even when USC won games and they would play like even a competent offense, like when like Colorado was healthy, or Notre Dame, they'd win, but they'd still give up. Or no, they didn't.
They lost. They lost to Notre Dame.
Even when they played a team where they could win, who did they play? The Cal, where they won like in overtime. They could even, if any team even had like a moderately competent offense, they were at least going to drop 20 points on that defense.
Oh,
and that was the most shocking thing.
More than that.
And anytime you can do that, you're just asking to be fired because there's nothing you could do. And I mean, like you said, I think that's almost more of an important hire than some of these head coaching ones because, like
absolutely.
said, USC has had everything put in their lap, like even to an extent defensively. Like you said, they got all the transfers in the world, and they're trying to just put it together for once. And in a weird way, I think this was their year, and they missed it totally because of that defense. Because you're playing the Big Ten schedule next year. There's going to be a period of adjustment to that because you're going to be playing in Iowa in November, and these kids are from Cali and from Hawaii and from all over the place, and they want to go play in the warm. And now you're sending them to Des Moines, and it's like
now they got to play in the snow. So totally different ball game.
Where a team Big Ten teams basically now are all the same. They just cram the ball down your throat 99 times.
I mean,
And
if
here they
USC was
go.
in the Big Ten this year, that offense would have never saw the field.
Yeah, they just would have held the ball and held the ball and held the ball. I mean, even to an extent, they fired Grinch, and then UCLA comes in and just shellacks them yesterday.
Yeah.
They finished the season 7-5 on a year where we honestly thought they could be a one-loss, no-loss team, and it's their last one. And the Pac-12 was competitive. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing the Pac-12 at all. But like I said, this just felt like the year where they could put it all together and be a title contender. And now you're going to the playoffs are expanding, yeah, but you're in a much tougher spot with a new defensive coordinator trying to figure it out on the fly when you've got a game against Ohio State in the horseshoe and it's 40 degrees with a wind chill at 32.
Absolutely. And just due to time constraints, we're going to move on. We have two more things that we're just going to touch on. Like I said, we got about 2 minutes before we got to get off here. Another notable coaching fire, Mississippi State fires Zach Arnett. And this is the one that kind of stood out to me. Dino Barbers is out at Syracuse, which I'm going to be completely honest, Matt. I think he is going to be one of the coaches that gets hired quicker than any of these coaches that are out of a job, because the job he's done in Syracuse, of all places, Syracuse, somebody's going to hire him, whether it be as a coordinator or a head coach. It's going to happen. Dude's a great coach. I think, given the circumstances, he did a phenomenal job at Syracuse, and I was actually surprised to see them let him go. But I guess Syracuse is getting a case of, well, maybe we think we're a little better than we actually are.
Yeah, I mean, I'd take Dino Babers at Indiana in a second, because I expect
Dino Barbers
Tom Allen.
to IU confirmed.
I would take that in a heartbeat just to have a shot at something different. And you know what? It'd be funny if Tom Allen ended up at USC or something, because we're talking about it. Because Indiana's defense ain't too shabby this year.
Maybe he's the defensive coordinator they need. Tom Allen, the new DC at USC, and Dino Barbers, the new head coach at IU. Let's do it.
That would be the wildest world to live in. I would honestly love that to death. And Dino Babers also sucks from I don't know what the right word is, from a optics standpoint, because he's one of the few African American coaches you've got in a sport that's predominantly African American, and you just hate to see that, because a lot of times those guys, for some reason, because of prejudices and stupid thoughts, don't get a second chance. And I really want to see that guy get a second chance, because he's a hell of a coach.
Absolutely. But that is actually all the time we have for today. As always, follow Less is More Sports on YouTube and Spotify to hear our latest episodes. Follow our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Threads. That's at Less is More Sports to get the latest updates of new content coming soon. And hope you all enjoyed this episode. As always, comment in the comment section below what you like, what you didn't like about each episode. Yes, Matt?
I will say, if that comes true and Dino Babers ends up at IU and Tom Allen is the defensive coordinator at USC or something, I will eat an entire pack of gum in one chew.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen. But until next time, we're going to talk until our next episode, where we just let Jesus take the wheel, like a lot of these coaches without a job now.
All right, Carrie Underwood.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Oh, man.